I've always tried to be a good daughter. I didn't want to cause trouble. I didn't want to stir up any drama. But it seemed like trouble always found me. No matter how hard I tried to avoid it. When my stepmother, Karen, came into our lives, I thought I could handle it. After all, my parents had been divorced for years by then. And my dad deserved to be happy again. I was 17 when they got married, old enough to understand that life didn't always go as planned. That people moved on. But things with Karen were different. She wasn't like the other women my dad had dated. She was controlling, manipulative, and, above all, insecure. It was like she saw me as a threat from day one. I didn't realize how bad it would get until Karen announced that she was pregnant. I remember sitting at the dinner table when she and my dad shared the news. My dad was beaming, his eyes shining with joy. But Karen barely looked at me as she spoke. Her hand was resting protectively on her stomach. And the message was clear, asterisk, this is our family now. And you don't belong here anymore, asterisk. At first, I tried to be excited for them. I really did. I thought maybe the baby would bring us all closer together. That we could start fresh. But instead, Karen's behavior got worse. She started picking fights over the smallest things, how I loaded the dishwasher, how I folded the laundry, even the way I left my shoes by the front door. It felt like nothing I did was good enough. And every time I tried to defend myself, she would accuse me of being disrespectful. You're pushing me away, she said one night after another argument. You don't want me in your life. And you certainly don't want this baby. I stood there, stunned, as she hurled accusation after accusation at me. I had never said anything like that. Sure, things were tense. But I didn't want to push anyone away. I didn't even know how we'd gotten to this point. But Karen was convinced that I was trying to sabotage her relationship with my dad. And nothing I said could change her mind. The worst part was, my dad believed her. I watched as the man who had raised me, who had always been my rock, sided with Karen time and time again. It was like I didn't matter anymore. All he cared about was protecting his new family. Then one night, things escalated. It was another argument, this time about something ridiculous. Like how I hadn't cleaned up the kitchen properly after dinner. I was so exhausted from walking on eggshells around Karen that I snapped back at her. I don't even remember what I said. But it was enough to send her over the edge. Karen stood there, shaking with anger, her hands on her swollen belly. And she said the words that changed everything. You're trying to hurt me. You're trying to hurt my baby. My heart stopped. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Hurt her? Hurt the baby? I would never. Before I could even process what was happening, my dad came storming into the room, his face red with fury. He didn't even give me a chance to explain. He didn't want to hear it. He just told me to pack my bags and get out. Your stepmother and I can't deal with this stress right now, he said. His voice cold and final. You need to go. I was stunned. Completely blindsided. I had nowhere to go. I was still in high school. And I had no idea how I was going to survive on my own. But my dad didn't care. He was done with me. So, I packed up my things, threw them into my car, and left the only home I had ever known. I spent the next few months bouncing between friends' houses, couch surfing while I tried to finish my senior year of high school. It was humiliating. I felt like a burden. Like I had nowhere to belong. And the worst part was, my dad never called. Not once. It was like I had been erased from his life completely. Karen had won. Then, one night, everything changed. I was sitting in my friend Rachel's living room, scrolling mindlessly through my phone when my dad's name appeared on the screen. For a second, I thought I was seeing things. He hadn't contacted me in months. And now, out of nowhere, he was calling. I hesitated before answering, my heart pounding in my chest. Something had to be wrong. Why else would he be calling me now? Hello? I said, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. And then I heard my dad's voice. Shaky and broken. I need you to come home, he said. His voice barely recognizable. My heart sank. Why? What happened? It's Karen, he said. His voice cracking. There was an accident. She lost the baby. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. Karen had lost the baby. The same baby that she had used as a weapon against me. I didn't know how to feel. A part of me felt guilty for even thinking that way. But I couldn't help it. Karen had made my life a living hell. And now everything had changed. I need you to come home, my dad repeated. His voice desperate. I can't do this alone. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. This was the same man who had kicked me out without a second thought. Who had chosen his new wife over his own daughter. And now he wanted me back. Now that his world was falling apart. But I knew I couldn't stay angry forever. Despite everything, he was still my dad. And no matter how much he had hurt me, I couldn't turn my back on him now. I'll be there, I said. My voice soft but firm. When I pulled up to the house the next day, everything felt different. The house that had once been my home now felt like a stranger's. I hadn't been back since the night my dad kicked me out. And standing in front of it now, I felt a mix of dread and sadness. I knocked on the door. And my dad opened it almost immediately. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His face was pale. His eyes red and swollen. For a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other. Then, without a word, he pulled me into a hug. I'm so sorry, he whispered. His voice thick with emotion. I should never have let things get this bad. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to forgive him, to let it all go. But another part of me was still so angry. Angry at him for believing Karen's lies. Angry at him for choosing her over me. I'm here now, I said, pulling away from the hug. What do you need me to do? The next few days were a blur. Karen was still in the hospital, recovering from the miscarriage. My dad didn't want to talk about it, but I could tell he was falling apart inside. He spent most of his time sitting in silence, staring at nothing. When Karen finally came home, things got even worse. She barely spoke to me. Her eyes filled with resentment every time she looked my way. It was like she blamed me for everything that had happened, even though I had done nothing wrong. I kept my distance, not wanting to cause any more trouble. But it was clear that things would never be the same between us. One night, as I was lying in bed, I heard my dad and Karen arguing downstairs. Their voices were low, but I could make out bits and pieces of the conversation. She doesn't belong here, Karen hissed. You need to choose. It's either her or me. I can't just kick her out again, my dad said, his voice tired and defeated. She's my daughter. Your daughter? Karen snapped. She's the reason I lost the baby. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Karen thought it was my fault. How could she blame me for something like that? I hadn't even been in the house when it happened. I wanted to scream, to confront her, but I knew it wouldn't make any difference. Karen had already made up her mind about me. No matter what I did, she would always see me as the enemy. The next morning, I packed my bags again. I couldn't stay here. Not like this. My dad tried to stop me, but I told him I couldn't live in a house where I wasn't wanted. I wasn't going to wait around for him to make a choice between me and Karen. As I drove away from the house for the second time, I felt a strange sense of relief. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I was done trying to please people who didn't want me in their lives. And this time, I wasn't coming back.